A woman I had never met in my life sent me a message crying, telling me she was so sorry to hear I'd lost my battle, and attached a memorial post with my own face on it, my own name spelled correctly, viewed and shared over 12,000 times. I hadn't lost any battle. I wasn't sick. I had never been sick a day in my adult life. My own cousin had spent 3 years running an entire fake cancer fundraiser using my identity, and strangers across the country had just watched her announce, in front of thousands of them, that I was dead. I sat frozen with my phone in my hand for what felt like a very long time after reading that message, rereading it 3 or 4 times, genuinely wondering for one disorienting moment if I'd somehow misunderstood the words in front of me. The woman's name was Karen, someone I didn't recognize at all, writing with the specific, exhausted grief of someone who'd apparently been following my supposed illness for a long time. Her message was long, detailed, full of specific memories she believed she shared with me, a comment I'd supposedly left on one of her own posts about her father's illness 2 years earlier, a moment of connection over shared hospital waiting rooms that had never actually happened between us at all. I clicked through to the memorial post she'd linked before I fully processed what I was doing, and there it was, my own face, a photo I recognized from an old, barely used social media account, framed inside a black border with candles and ribbon graphics, my name underneath it, and a caption describing how bravely I had fought until the very end, surrounded by the family who loved her most. I remember reading that phrase 3 separate times, each time feeling less like I was reading words and more like I was watching my own life narrated back to me by someone who had never actually lived it. My name is Megan. I'm a dental hygienist, which means I spend my days doing careful, unglamorous work most people never think much about, the kind of job that requires patience and precision, but rarely draws any attention at all. I've always kept my own life quietly private, minimal social media, no interest in public visibility of any kind. I hadn't posted anything to that particular old account in over 4 years. That's part of what made this so disorienting. An entire fabricated version of my life had been circulating publicly in detail for years, while the actual version of me had no idea any of it existed, going about an entirely ordinary week of dental cleanings and grocery runs while thousands of strangers believed I was dying, and then dead. My cousin Jessica and I were close as kids, the way cousins close in age often are, sleepovers and summer visits, the ordinary warmth of extended family that doesn't require constant contact to feel real. I remember one particular summer, maybe when we were both around 10, spending nearly every day together at her family's pool, inventing elaborate games that lasted entire afternoons, the kind of easy childhood closeness you assume, without ever examining it, will simply continue in some form forever. We drifted into the normal distance of adulthood over the years, occasional holiday gatherings, a birthday message here and there, nothing dramatic, nothing estranged, just the unremarkable rhythm most extended families settle into once everyone has their own separate life to manage. She got married a few years before all of this, worked in retail management for a while, seemed, from the outside, to be living an entirely ordinary adult life, the same as the rest of us. Once I got past the initial shock enough to actually think clearly, I started searching for the fundraiser page itself, the original source Karen's memorial post had apparently been built from. It took less than 10 minutes to find it, and once I did, I understood I was looking at something far larger and older than a single cruel post. The original fundraiser was dated 3 years earlier, describing Megan as newly diagnosed with an aggressive, rare form of cancer, asking for help covering treatment costs insurance wouldn't fully cover. The language was detailed, specific, emotionally calibrated in exactly the way that makes people want to help. Mentions of a frightening diagnosis appointment, the fear of telling family, gratitude for early support that had already started coming in. I remember reading that first post with a strange, dissociated feeling, like reading a very convincing short story about a stranger who happened to share my exact name and face. I scrolled through years of updates after that, each one more elaborate than the last. Fake treatment milestones, described with specific dates and appointment details. Fabricated setbacks requiring emergency additional fundraising rounds, each one timed, I noticed later, suspiciously close to whenever donations for the current round seemed to be slowing down. Entire fictional medical appointments described in enough specific, plausible detail that I found myself, disturbingly, almost believing them myself for a disorienting half second before remembering none of it had ever happened to me at all. A described allergic reaction to a treatment medication. A fabricated overnight hospital stay complete with details about the specific unit, and the kindness of a particular nurse who apparently never existed. There were photos throughout, photos I recognized immediately as my own, pulled from that same dormant, rarely used account, recaptioned with descriptions of hospital visits and treatment side effects I had never experienced in my life. One photo, an ordinary selfie I'd taken on an unremarkable Tuesday afternoon looking tired after a long shift at work, had been recaptioned as documenting day 3 after the second round, accompanied by dozens of supportive comments from strangers praying for my strength. I called my brother Marcus that same evening, my hand still shaking slightly as I pulled up the fundraiser to show him over video call. Marcus works in IT security, the kind of methodical, technically skilled person who processes shocking information by immediately looking for the mechanism behind it rather than sitting in the emotion of it first. I watched his expression shift from disbelief to something more focused and controlled within about a minute of scrolling through the page himself, his jaw tightening as he read through update after update. "Okay," he said, his voice steadying into something more clinical, the tone I imagine he uses at work when a client system has actually been compromised. "First thing, don't comment. Don't message anyone connected to this page yet. Let's figure out who's actually running it before we do anything that tips them off. If whoever's behind this realizes we're looking, they could delete everything before we have real documentation. Who would even do this?" I asked him, still staring at my own recaptioned photo on the screen between us. "Who does this for 3 years?" "I don't know yet," he said. "But crowdfunding platforms leave a surprising amount of digital residue, if you know where to look. Give me a few days." Over the following several days, Marcus worked through the platform's account details methodically, cross-referencing registration information, payout timestamps, and small inconsistencies in the update posting patterns. Crowdfunding platforms don't always make account ownership easy to trace from the outside, but Marcus found what he needed in a linked recovery email address, one that had been used years earlier in an old extended family group chat none of us had used in ages, still associated with a profile photo cropped from a family gathering I actually remembered attending, a 4th of July barbecue, I realized later, looking at the cropped edge of someone's arm still visible at the frame's border. He called me late on a Thursday night, and I could hear something careful and heavy in his voice before he even said anything substantial. "Meg," he said, "I need you to sit down for this." "Just tell me," I said. "The account traces back to Jessica." I remember the specific, sinking quality of that moment, different from the earlier shock of finding the fundraiser at all. This wasn't a stranger's opportunistic scam using a public figure's stolen likeness. This was my own cousin, someone I'd shared a bedroom with during childhood sleepovers, someone whose kids I'd bought birthday presents for, quietly building and maintaining an elaborate fictional version of my death for 3 straight years. I sat with that information privately for almost a week before telling anyone beyond Marcus, replaying years of ordinary family interactions with Jessica in my head, searching for some sign I must have missed. Holiday dinners where she'd seemed a little quieter than usual. A birthday message that felt slightly more sentimental than I'd registered at the time. None of it added up to anything conclusive. That was, I think, the most unsettling part, how completely ordinary everything on the surface had continued to look the entire time. I approached my Aunt Denise carefully, Jessica's mother, without immediately accusing anyone of anything, just asking general questions about how Jessica had been doing lately, how her finances looked since she'd left her retail management job. I remember sitting across from her at her own kitchen table, the same one Jessica and I had eaten countless meals at as kids, choosing my words carefully, still not entirely sure how much I wanted to reveal yet. Denise's answers came slower than usual, a hesitation I recognized even before she said much of anything. She set down her coffee cup and looked at it for a long moment before answering. "Honestly, I've wondered about that myself," Denise finally admitted. "She's been out of steady work for almost 3 years now, but she never seems to be struggling the way I'd expect. She took the kids on a nice vacation last year that I couldn't figure out how she afforded. I saw a notification on her phone once, some donation platform, and when I asked about it, she said it was for a friend's medical fund. I didn't push. I probably should have. Did you ever ask her directly about the money? I asked. Once, Denise said. She got defensive. Said I was being nosy about things that weren't my business. I let it go. She's my daughter. I didn't want to assume the worst about her without a real reason to. Hearing Denise's uneasy corroboration confirmed something I'd been afraid to fully accept. This wasn't an isolated incident I'd stumbled onto by pure chance. There had been small, visible inconsistencies in Jessica's life for over a year that everyone around her, myself included, had simply not looked at closely enough to question. I watched Denise's face as the fuller implications of her own answers started to settle over her, her expression shifting into something like dawning, guilty recognition. Scrolling further through the fundraiser's comment history, I noticed one name appearing repeatedly across years of updates, Carol Whitfield, a woman who had not only donated multiple times herself, but had apparently organized an entire fundraising drive at her own church specifically around Megan's story, encouraging her congregation to contribute. I found an entire post from Carol, dated over a year earlier, describing how her church's women's group had raised nearly $2,000 in a single weekend bake sale specifically to help with Megan's treatment costs, complete with photos of a folding table covered in donated baked goods and a hand-lettered sign with my name on it. I reached out to Carol directly, as gently as I could manage, uncertain how a total stranger would react to learning the cause she'd championed for years never actually existed. I drafted that first message probably a dozen times, trying to find language that wouldn't sound like an accusation aimed at her, before finally sending something simple, asking if she'd be willing to talk by phone about a fundraiser she'd supported. Carol was devastated in a way that genuinely broke my heart to witness, even over a phone call. She donated repeatedly herself, organized friends and fellow congregants to do the same, prayed publicly for my recovery during difficult setback updates that had never actually happened to anyone. I could hear her voice shaking as the reality of what I was telling her actually landed. We prayed for you by name every Sunday for almost a year, she said. I have a photo of our whole prayer circle holding a sign with your name on it. I sent that photo to the fundraiser page myself, so you could see how many people were rooting for you. I'm so sorry, I told her, though I felt strange apologizing for something I'd had no part in. Don't you dare apologize to me, she said, her voice sharpening. None of this is your fault. You didn't ask for any of this. What surprised me most was the direction of Carol's anger once she understood the situation fully. She didn't turn any of it toward me. I want to help however I can, she continued. I still have every donation receipt, every update I shared with my church. If that helps prove what actually happened, you should have all of it. I want whoever did this held accountable. Not because of my own money, honestly, though that stings, because of what she did to the actual idea of you, to people who genuinely cared. I remember sitting with my phone against my ear for a long time after that call ended, feeling something complicated settle over me. Grief for Carol's genuine, misdirected generosity, and a strange, unexpected gratitude that the first real stranger I'd spoken to about all of this had responded with grace instead of the anger I'd braced myself for. Marcus and I brought everything we'd compiled, the traced account, Denise's corroboration, Carol's donation records, to Detective Ray Solano, who specializes in online fraud and identity theft cases. Solano listened to the entire timeline without much visible reaction, the calm of someone who's seen a lot of unusual cases pass through his desk over the years, occasionally jotting notes on a legal pad as we walked him through everything. This happens more than people realize, he told us once we'd finished. Fabricated illness fundraisers, sometimes running for years before anyone catches them. Sometimes it's a complete stranger targeting a public figure's identity. Sometimes, like this, it's someone close to the person being impersonated, which honestly makes it both easier to eventually trace and harder for the family to process. The financial scope is usually bigger than the family initially assumes, too. Once we can actually subpoena the platform's full records instead of just what's visible in the public comment history. How much bigger are we talking? Marcus asked. I won't know exact numbers until we get the subpoena results, Solano said. But in my experience, What's visible publicly is usually maybe a third to half of the actual total raised. A lot of larger individual donations happen privately, outside the public comment feed. He was right. The formal investigation, once it moved forward with proper legal authority to access the platform's complete financial records, revealed the fundraiser had actually collected close to $40,000 over 3 years from dozens of donors, far more than the visible comment history alone had suggested. I remember staring at that number on the page Solano showed us, feeling something between vindication and a fresh, deeper horror at the actual scale of what had been happening. $40,000, funneled out over 3 years, in increments small and large enough to never trigger any obvious red flag, at least not until someone actually went looking. We confronted Jessica together, Marcus and I, with Denise present as well, once Solano's investigation had compiled enough documentation that there was no reasonable path left for denial. I remember sitting across from Jessica at her mother's kitchen table, the same table we'd eaten holiday dinners at for years, laying out the printed evidence in front of her rather than simply expressing the anger I still very much felt. Denise sat beside her daughter, her hands folded tightly in her lap, her expression a mixture of dread and resignation that told me she already suspected exactly what was coming. Jessica, when very pale looking at the first few pages, the printed fundraiser updates alongside dated financial records Solano's team had compiled. She didn't try to argue with the documentation. She sat there for a long moment, staring at the papers, her hands trembling slightly, before she finally broke down completely. "It started so much smaller than this," she said, her voice cracking, tears starting almost immediately. "I lost my job, and then I couldn't make rent, and I panicked and posted something vague about a medical emergency, not even specifically about you at first. And then people started donating, more than I expected, asking for updates, wanting to know more details to feel more connected to it. And I kept going. I used your name because people already knew you, because it felt more real than making someone up entirely. I never meant for it to become 3 years. I don't even fully understand how it became 3 years. You told people I died, Jessica," I said, my own voice shaking now too. "You made an entire community grieve, someone who was never even sick. Carol organized her whole church around this. Do you understand what you actually did to real people?" "I know," she said, barely above a whisper. "I know exactly what I did. I just didn't know how to stop once it started working. Every time I thought about ending it, I thought about the money stopping too. And I was scared, and I just kept telling myself one more update, one more round, and I'd figure out how to end it properly. I never did. I didn't offer forgiveness in that kitchen, and I don't think I owed it to her in that moment. But I understood, in a way that complicated my anger without erasing it, that this hadn't begun as a calculated, cruel scheme so much as a small, desperate lie that she'd never found a way to stop feeding once it started working. The legal resolution took several more months to fully play out. Jessica was formally charged with fraud and identity theft, and a restitution plan was established that prioritized repaying the real donors first, people like Carol who'd genuinely given money believing every word of a story that never happened. I know full restitution will likely take years, given Jessica's actual financial situation, but having an actual structured plan in place, rather than just an abstract sense of owed justice, mattered more to me than I expected it to. Solano's office kept us updated as the case moved through the system, and I remember feeling a strange mixture of exhaustion and relief each time another procedural step actually happened, another small piece of formal accountability landing where it belonged. I worked with the fundraiser platform directly to have the original page taken down and replaced with a clear public correction, explaining as plainly as I could that the person named in the fundraiser had never had the illness described, and that the account had been run without her knowledge by a family member now facing criminal charges. It felt strange writing a public statement clarifying that I was, in fact, alive and had never been sick, addressed to thousands of strangers who had spent years believing otherwise. I reached out personally to Carol's church community as well, writing a longer letter explaining what had actually happened, thanking them sincerely for the kind of generosity that had been completely real, even though the cause it was aimed at never was. Carol read that letter aloud to her congregation herself, She told me later, and said the room had gone very quiet before several people came up afterwards simply to tell her they were glad, at least, that no one had actually been sick and suffering the way they believed for so long. That was one of the more vulnerable things I've ever done, putting my own name and face back into public view specifically to correct a lie, knowing plenty of strangers would now know intimate, fabricated details about a version of my life I'd never actually lived. I remember feeling exposed in a way I never had before. This quiet, private person suddenly having to explain herself publicly for something she hadn't done at all. Jessica's place in our family has changed permanently, in ways I don't think will ever fully repair. Denise still loves her daughter, obviously, but I've watched something guarded settle into how she talks about her now, a caution that wasn't there before, a kind of careful distance even in ordinary conversation. Holiday gatherings look different this year, smaller, quieter, with an absence at the table that everyone notices but nobody discusses directly. I've kept a careful, limited distance from Jessica myself, not entirely severed, but nowhere close to what it once was either. We've exchanged a few brief, stilted messages since the confrontation, mostly logistical, nothing that resembles the ease we once had as kids sharing a bedroom during summer sleepovers. Carol and I still talk occasionally, an unlikely friendship built out of genuinely strange circumstances. She sent me a card a few months after everything concluded, just a short note saying she was glad I was healthy, glad the truth had come out, and that she'd learned something valuable about verifying causes more carefully before organizing others around them, without it souring her genuine instinct toward generosity itself. We've had coffee twice now, actual in-person coffee, two women who never should have known each other at all finding something like real friendship in the wreckage of a lie neither of us created. I think about that first message from Karen sometimes, a total stranger crying over a death that never happened, more invested in a fictional version of my life than most of the people who actually know me had any reason to be. It's a strange, specifically modern kind of violation, having to publicly prove you're still alive to people who genuinely, generously grieved a lie. I've thought a lot, since all of this, about how easily a convincing enough story, told patiently enough over enough time, can become more emotionally real to strangers than an actual, unremarkable life ever could. I don't know that I have a clean answer for what that says about any of us, myself included, but I know I check in on real people more deliberately now, rather than trusting that ordinary silence always means ordinary well-being. She spent 3 years telling the internet I was dying. She just never planned for the day I'd have to prove, publicly, that I was still here, and that the people who believed her lie would end up believing me instead.